Delighted to be here today and to start this discussion. I think we're all at the beginning of the journey with the Academy, and the discussion will go on through the various sessions, but we're also really keen to keep the discussion going between the sessions. So yeah, it's lovely to see the stimulating debate that's going on. So I'm just going to touch in the 5 minutes I've got upon some of the issues that we're seeing and how we're seeing this developing fast, both from the particular issues that are being faced, but then how the regulatory and legal landscape is responding to that. So first of all, a bit of a recap, but perhaps an extension to some of the issues that we've been talking about already this morning. So we've been hearing about the exciting developments from Parjeet around the drug discovery, and indeed, we've seen huge benefits from that facing the current pandemic. We've heard also about the issues around clinical trials and diagnostics. The use of imagery to diagnose is having massive benefits. So interestingly, the EU Parliament itself at the start of the pandemic last year invested in AI for effectively imaging purposes and then provided that out to hospitals. It's really interesting to see at that governmental level the need to be involved, but also to be able to monitor actually how this is all working. But tremendous effects with reports back that these chest CT scans were being done in 10 seconds compared with very experienced radiographers in 15 minutes. So big benefits there. We mustn't forget the streamlining of processes generally as well. So as in addition to the great benefits at perhaps the sharp end of what we're talking about today, we can use AI to streamline everything that needs to happen to achieve those things. And another area is the supply chain. So COVID again has made sure that we're all having to think about supply of product during the difficult times. And AI can be used particularly to gather live data and then to react to that in live time to enable people to maximize their supply chains and ensure delivery. And then we've talked about at the patient end, it is after all about providing better healthcare to the patient, and delivery of healthcare is key to that. So discussion around robotics, and I was really interested to hear about Violet and the ability to kill viruses that way. And interestingly, what the pandemic has shown us is that it's not just about treating patients, but it's also about protecting the healthcare professionals who are working with them. So AI can play a real role there as well. So what have we seen? So if we roll back to the autumn of 2019, I find it really interesting to compare. We were talking to a number of life sciences companies at that time about AI and its introduction into their businesses. And at that stage, it has to be said, it was limited. The excitement was there, the opportunities were seen, but the challenges were weighing quite heavy. So there definitely was slow uptake. But then we roll forward and COVID-19 hits, and the urgency of the situation, the urgency of innovation really brought AI into the forefront. And we've seen the various tools. And again, I think this is an area to perhaps broaden out the way we think about AI. It's not just about perhaps the true machine learning, the independence of AI, but behind that we have data and data analytics. This is an absolutely key part to everything we do today, to be able to both access and then analyze the data that we have. And then the connectivity piece, that's how we're all able to engage today, is because we've moved on so fast in being able to connect. And in this sector, telemedicine has been so important, with the inability to actually meet with patients face to face and apps supporting that. So we've seen big developments there. But the digital platforms on which all of these technologies sit again, are key. We need to have investment in the digital platforms to enable us to have that connectivity, to enable us to move forward with artificial intelligence. And I know that we've talked about trust already, and people need to see the benefits and trust in AI. And one of the comments that I heard recently, talking to a surgeon from Imperial College, the concern about lack of control AI is perhaps very much press-worthy, but his take on it was that actually a lot of these tools give the medical professionals better control, because what they have is the data from which they can make their decisions. So it's really useful to look at it in that context rather than merely the headlines around us losing human control. So what are we seeing in terms of what's happening to enable AI? Again, in the chat, people have been talking about collaborations. This is huge within this sector, dare I say. It's a combination of sectors that come together when we talk about AI in life sciences. We're seeing clients wanting to develop their innovation strategy very much to include AI at the forefront. And that is taking various forms. So it can be in-house development, but there's also the procurement to actually buy in the AI that's required. We're seeing investments in AI businesses. Often these are smaller, perhaps agile companies who have focused on a particular area of AI, and therefore a lot of the businesses within the sector are seeing those as real opportunities to bring those skill sets on board and to bring their journey forward. We're also seeing M&A, so acquisitions of AI-rich businesses are across all sectors, but a very important one for this particular sector. And as I say, collaborations of all kinds are happening in life sciences. We heard it from the early days of the pandemic. The need to develop PPE was just one of them. And we saw people from across different sectors coming together to work together. And again, fantastic results coming out of that, so that people the speed with which they were able to manufacture was many multiples of what they were able to do alone. So all of those trends are things that we're seeing really hotting up. And I think the whole piece around collaboration is one that we'll come back to in the future, because there's a lot to be thought about in this particular area. But looking then at some of the perhaps the issues that we've started to talk about just earlier, so what are these key regulatory legal issues that we need to be grappling with? Well, first off, it's true to say, as I mentioned earlier, that there's a whole range of issues to be dealt with, and they're probably at varying stages of development, but they all need to be dealt with. We also know that all the government organisations, the intergovernment organisations, this is a hot topic for them. So they are responding quickly to the industry's needs in this area. So yeah, the first thing, again, we've mentioned it many, many times already, and how many days can actually go by without data being said several times. So yeah, data is absolutely key to the use of AI. But we need to break that down into various areas. So we've talked about access to data. We've talked about unbiased data. It needs to have assurance behind it. It needs to be something that we can validate. But also we go on to issues around, again, mentioned in the chat, around data privacy compliance when it comes to handling personal data. But we also need to think about ownership issues. So how can we ensure that we can have access to the data that perhaps other people are claiming ownership of, if there is such thing as ownership? Data in terms of the regulatory data privacy angle is very well developed. We have a lot of guidance, particularly coming out of the UK regulator. And the very interesting thing around that area of regulation is that some of the core principles around protection of data become absolutely key to the whole of AI. So they're those issues around transparency, for example, which pervade the whole aspect of AI. The next area, again touched upon around patents, is intellectual property rights. But what we have to remember here is that there are a whole range of intellectual property rights. And if we start to break down what AI actually is into its various components, there are a number of intellectual property rights that provide protection. So we need to analyse what each of those are. And as Parjeet said earlier, we have challenges, particularly around the area of when the AI starts to create or invent itself, then who should own the fruits of that invention, that creativity? This is a hot topic in the UK at the moment, and there has been a consultation that the Intellectual Property Office has undertaken, and the results of the consultation have come in recently. So if anybody's interested in that, we've put out an article around the developments there, and I think we're going to see things moving on. Greater confidence, greater certainty is going to evolve over the course of the next few months. Liability, the question asked earlier as to what holds people back. Liability is an area that concerns people. It's been highlighted, the health sector has been highlighted as a high risk area by the European Commission. So we know that it's something that needs to be dealt with. And again, we have a patchwork of issues covering liability. So each of those needs to be looked at. But really interesting in this area is the debate around, well, what would amount to negligence for a healthcare professional using AI today? AI that went wrong, could that be seen to be negligent? But roll on 5 years, 10 years, could a doctor be considered negligent for not using AI as a tool? So yeah, very interesting debates that we can come back to on that. We've talked about transparency. This is one of the big challenges for AI, is actually understanding, even for those who are real experts in programming, understanding how some decisions are being made. So we need to have better knowledge of that. But again, being clear, as Chris was saying earlier, being clear as to expectations and the results that come from that. We need governance as well to ensure that the parties are all brought in to working to the right governance to ensure the right results, which then lead in to the whole issue of ethics and trust. And ethics is an issue that we'll come back to. Codes of conduct are very much being developed in this area, and increasingly we're seeing in this sector on people's websites their own statements around their ethical approach to the use of AI. But trust pervades it all. The last point there is bias, and trust and bias are key issues that really need to be talked about together, because we've talked about bias in the data. We can then have bias in the algorithms, the people who actually program the algorithms, and we can have bias in the way that the results are achieved and the way that we deal with those results. But if we go back to the beginning and look at the data, we need to make sure that the data is complete and unbiased. And in order to do that, some of my discussions with healthcare professionals on the front line who are actually dealing with patients are saying we need to develop that trust to enable the patients to feel able to trust people to provide their data to them. So some big issues there that we'll be delighted to continue the discussion during the sessions ahead and in between.